Thank you, 92nd Street Y. Highway up there. What's going on, David?
Okay, so we're gonna talk for about 45 minutes, and I'm gonna get some questions from the audience, and you guys can get those questions answered. But I want to know, and I think everybody here would like to know, how did this collaboration start? It's your third novel, but how did it start?
How did it start? Do you remember?
He took pity on me and thought I needed something to do in my old age. Actually, we have the same lawyer/agent, Bob Barnett, and he suggested, since I continue to consume all these mysteries and thrillers at a high rate of annual consumption, including virtually every book David Baldacci ever wrote.
I've never met anybody who reads more than President Clinton.
And he said, you ought to write one, and you should do it with James Patterson, because he'd be a good partner for you. And I said, Bob, why in God's name would James Patterson ever write a book with me? I said, the country.
And I said the same thing when Bob came to me. Why should I write a book with him?
And, and I said, the country's so polarized now, and I don't know. But anyway, he did. We got together, and our first conversation will tell you what all of them are about. He said, well, what do you want to write about? I said, I want to write about cybersecurity, because it's a huge problem for all Americans without regard to party or philosophy. And, a lot of people don't understand it. They don't understand what a big deal it is. I said, what do you want to write about? He said, I'm a storyteller. I want the president to go missing.
A lot of people want that. No.
So, anyway.
That's not what I meant.
So, he said to me, can the president go missing? And I said, yeah, but it's a lot harder than you think. Because not only because the Secret Service covers you, but every person in America who gets Secret Service protection can sign off on it, except the president. There's no provision in the law for the president to sign off. I said, so the only way it could happen is if we were facing a colossal, total cyber communications collapse.
And I said, that's perfect.
And we had a libertarian genius who suspected all government and said, I can save you from this, but I'll only do it if I talk to the president alone. I said, I literally can't think of another way that could do it. So it happened that the blah stuff that I wanted to write about and the cheap thrills he wanted to give us melded.
So, David, you're going to have time for one more question, and then we're going to take audience questions.
I know. This is the easiest gig I've ever had, so this is great. So, what's the division of labor? How does it work with you two? What are the lines of communication?
Well, in this relationship, I'm sort of the first gentleman. And so, I do what I'm supposed to do. I do my little bit. We go back and forth on everything, the outline of chapters. He writes some stuff, I write some stuff. That's kind of the way it goes.
He's being modest, but he also is being a little disingenuous. We agree what we're going to write about. And we sort of agree on an outline, which we may or may not change as the book goes along, depends on where it leads us. And then he wants it to be authentic. He said, I want you to do this to make sure we're authentic. And he always says, like in this last book, he had this big meeting occurring in the White House in a room that won't hold more than 4 people. So
I said, that won't work.
We try to work stuff like that out. So he gives me a bunch of questions at the beginning of the 3 books we've done. And then he writes the first 2 chapters. And I come back with the answers to the questions, and then we go back and forth and back and forth.
So should I ask this? Anyway.
This looks good.
Do it. So if there's a dispute, who wins?
There's never been a dispute. One interesting thing about this book, though, when I talked backstage about this, about halfway through we're both going, this is not working. And you said,
Yeah, I called him. I said, Jim, we got to do something because I don't give a damn what happens to any of them.
that's a problem.
Yeah,
that
that's it.
sounds like something I'd watch on Netflix.
I don't care enough about these people. And even in the, even the ones that are guilty of crimes, you want to be interesting people that you're curious about. And if they went bad, why did they go bad? And what next? And it
wasn't there. And that's scary, as David knows. It's one thing, we were talking backstage about this, if you're going, this could be better, this could be better. It's another thing when you go, this is not working. And that's frightening. But we overcame it, I think. We did overcome it.
Redid it all and wound up loving it. So I hope you do too.
It's too late now. They've already gotten copies. So
That's right.
But you can recommend. That's your job, by the way, when you leave here. Because when you speak to groups, I remember I was doing a thing with it was a school, and the whole thing was to get more volunteers. And at the end of it, I said, we haven't. You pat yourself on the back. We haven't done anything by talking about the problem. And I said, anybody who really wants to volunteer, please stand up. Because that's where the rubber meets the road. So here, the rubber meets the road when you recommend a book. Yeah, that's funny.
Just go buy 2 copies instead of 1, so we'll be good. So you've collaborated with Dolly Parton. So what are the differences?
There's a cool question. What's the difference between Dolly Parton and Bill Clinton? Bill has a bigger chest, weirdly, size-wise. I'm just saying, you asked for the difference. They're both delightful. One of the great things for me is the friendships between the president and myself and Dolly and myself. I mean, if I look back at the whole thing, that's what's really special. It's nice that the books have done well, but that's what we exchanged Christmas and birthday. He gave me recently a humidor, and he knows that I don't smoke. So I called him up. I said, do I put bubble gum or chocolate cigars in here? He said, at our age, bubble gum, because you want to exercise your gums and stuff. Truth, yeah.
I have to confess to this. In 1976, when I just been nominated for Attorney General, I was in the Nashville airport, and Ralph Nader, who was then famous for his first automobile safety book and all this stuff, he'd wanted to talk to me, so I got it on the phone. I'm talking to Ralph Nader on the phone. And Dolly Parton walks by because it's her airport. And I said, Ralph, I've got to go. And I said, I'll call you tomorrow, and I hung the phone up. And I chased down Dolly Parton and told her that when she had performed in a little place in western Arkansas, when she got back together with Porter Wagner, that was those of you who like Dolly Parton know this story, but I said, Hillary and I drove down to see her and stayed from the first song to the last, and that we were ardent fans. And she didn't know me from Adam's All Fox and didn't care about what Attorney General was. But she's a very smart woman.
Oh, she's very, very, very smart. Well, one quick Dolly story. When we were writing, one of my birthdays came up, and she called on the phone, and she sang happy birthday to me over the phone. And what I wanted to say was, Dolly, I want you to call again, and when the voicemail comes up, I want you to sing again. But I didn't have the guts to do it, so...
Anyway, you'd like her. She's an impressive person.
A number of years ago, I got a fan letter from Dolly Parton. And I'd written 20 books by then, and I showed it to my mom, and she's still alive. And she said, son, finally, you're successful. I was like, well, better late than never, Mom. So you mentioned outlining. So are you guys outliners or pantsers, or a combination of both?
I'm a big outliner, and you're not, which
I know,
is interesting. Yeah. And I think it goes all sorts of ways with writers. I know some who do it a lot. I'm not a slave to the outline, and we always do it. I don't know. Did you do it out loud for your books?
For the nonfiction
should.
ones, yeah, always.
No, really? No, okay.
For the nonfiction ones, and then I was sort of following your lead on this, but I find them helpful as long as you're not imprisoned by them.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared to say, look, I'm writing a story here, truth or fiction, and it's taken a different turn, and this won't make any more sense. In other words, it helps keep me going, but I try not to be jailed by it.
Right. Now, I've always thought sometimes that writing an outline and actually writing the book is the difference between if you're Tom Brady throwing football in practice, which is the outline, and throwing a football in a game where 11 guys want to kill you. And sometimes when you're right in the trenches and you know you can't kick the can down the road, you need to make important decisions at that point in time. Maybe you're thinking a little bit better about the story. But so the plot for The First Gentleman, let's talk about that. And where did it come from? What inspired the story?
Honestly, I don't remember, but I think both of us, we couldn't remember a book that had been about The First Gentleman. So that was good that it was going to be fresh. So that was a piece of it. Do you remember much more?
No,
more
and
than that?
except I was thrilled. I'd given a lot of thought to it. Because
We all had.
it's a serious thing. I mean, when Hillary ran twice, both times I thought, God, if she wins, what can I do? Because there was a show on television that featured a woman president, and her husband, who had been president, was still her husband, but he became her chief of staff. And I have been knowing Hillary since yesterday. That wasn't about to happen. And it shouldn't. So I really gave it a lot of thought. I said, well, I'd like to be useful. And, she always talked to me about everything, just as I did with her. So she would ask me if she was worried about something and wanted my opinion. But if you're hanging around all the time and you used to be president and that's the way people see you, it's like being underfoot, and it wasn't going to work. So I needed something to do, and that's why I like this first gentleman we've got, because whether he's a murderer or not, he was not threatened by his wife's success. He was happy she got to be president, and he wanted to help her, but he wanted to help her in a way that didn't undermine her. So he tried to recreate President Henry's Council on Physical Fitness. And he was a professional football player until he got hurt, so that's what it's about. But it's the only political job I ever wanted in my life that I didn't get. And I think of it with great affection.
So did you have in mind the basic story? Obviously, with the setup of the president, the first gentleman, and former football player. Long time ago, murder, and then the allegations come back up, and the case goes forward again. And how did you move forward with that basic framework when you're putting the story together?
The football player, I mean, that's a very minor thing in the book. But the other big piece in the book are the two journalists, who are really the most important characters in the book. And the idea of having two kind of idealistic but not perfect journalists, to me, to both of us, was very exciting and terrific. And actually, Bria, the woman, she's probably, if there's a star, she's probably the star of the book.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the
And then we have a TV, we'll see what happens in Hollywood, but Stephen Knight, who wrote Peaky Blinders, he's writing the screenplay. So he's very, very good. So we'll see what he does.
But
He'll probably change everything. I'd be a ballet or something.
When the guy played football at Dartmouth, he was the first Ivy League football player ever to be drafted in the first round in the NFL. He lived in a big house with several people, one of whom became president, and the other became the chief of staff to the president. And it was kind of a fluke because the woman who became president moved to California and went to graduate school, got elected to the state legislature, wound up being involved with some popular issues in California, and came out of nowhere to get elected governor, which enabled her to run for president. And then she defeated a very senior United States senator, and he agreed to be her vice president, so they were able to win. And what we tried to do there, I'm not sure we did as much with her character as we should, but we did enough for the storyline, because you have to understand that no matter what happens, she had to be president that day. So her husband gets accused of murder. She loves him very much, and she doesn't want to believe this.
That's a huge thing driving the story. She has this kind of Sophie's choice.
And
he loves this guy. She hopes he's not a murderer, but
yeah, she got to show up for work. And then she got these two kids who remind her a lot of herself as a young college student, who one of whom was a Dartmouth student, and the other was not an athlete, but a skilled reporter and a good guitarist. And so in another life, they'd have been interesting people, but they might be trying to sink her presidency. So what's she supposed to do? So we tried to show that you can't stop being a human being. But if you're president, you can't let your humanity stop you from doing the job the American people hired you to do. You still got to show up, no matter how bad or beat down or brokenhearted you are, you have to show up.
I think the biggest thing in terms of turning the book around was making the president, the first gentleman, and these two journalists human. And I think, that's one of the things that's driving me crazy about the country now, because we just don't want to make people human. The left wants to make the right into devils, the right wants to make the left into devils, and it's just not useful, in my opinion. Just to give you an example about the president and the humanity, he called up in the summer, and he talked to Sue, and he said, put the picture phone for the phone, and he was with the grandkids, and he was dressed in this tiger suit, but you could only see his face. And yeah, there's a human being. And if we could just get back to that, I think it would be useful for the country,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And it was useful for our book because it turned it into a mess into a good book.
Now, did you base the two journalists on anyone you've known, or did you sort of use them as a symbol for what you'd like journalists to be doing more of today?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember actually basing anybody that I've done on anybody that I know. Maybe Samson, it crosses a buddy a little bit, but that's the only one that pops to mind. No, but I mean, you wanted the story that they're chasing to be huge and twisty and dramatic. I mean, like Woodward and Bernstein, they're chasing this big story. They're chasing this big story. I mean, if the first gentleman is a murderer, that's a pretty, in real life, that's pretty dramatic. I think. It would be, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. The hand back.
I have to say, it's thriller writers who are supposed to think of stuff that could never happen and then make it seem real. And I have to tell you, it's getting really hard to do that.
Yep. Our work is we got a lot of work ahead of us, I'll tell you.
I think if our publishers are out there, I think we need to be paid more. But that's just my thought on it. Now, President Clinton, I know you're a big reader. As Jim said, you probably read more than anyone else. As president, did you have a favorite time to read? Did you have a few minutes, a few hours where you would grab a book and sit down and read?
I tried to read a little bit every night before I went to bed. Normally, at night, I worked because I tried to minimize the amount of reading I had to do during the daytime, unless it was a 3-page memorandum and I had to say yes or no on something. Because I've discovered that a big part of having a productive presidency is having real interaction with people that you can trust to tell you what they think and help you work through hard decisions. And it's also important to reach out and see somebody. I ran into a Republican congressman not very long ago. He said that he came to the White House more when I was president than he did in the previous 12 years. But this guy was honest, and he was not vindictive, and he just was more conservative than I was, but he knew his stuff. So I did, I talked to him. And I think it's really important for a president to read, and to read things that you normally,
That's a problem.
that you normally wouldn't
Comic books are
read.
fine.
Benjamin Franklin said, "Our enemies are our friends, for they show us our faults." So when I read something critical of me, I would try to start with the assumption that it was true, not that it was false, and then see if I could work my way back. Now, that's totally different from the advice that Roy Cohn, who was helping Senator Joe McCarthy before he went to work for Donald Trump and his dad, he gave them very different advice. He said, deny everything. Doesn't matter if it's true or not, deny it, and always accuse other people of what you're doing or you're about to do. And if you do it well enough, people won't know you're guilty, and it'll help you politically. And Roy Cohn was probably Donald Trump's most important instructor. And it was interesting, he was a gay man.
Who's your mentor? Roy Cohn.
He was a gay man who died of AIDS. And yet he was a homophobic anti-Semite. He was Jewish too. And he was in it to win. And he thought that negative feelings were always more powerful than positive ones. And he may turn out to have been right. I hope not, but he may.
Roy has a lot to answer for, I think, fortunately. Is there one thing in the novel that you both reveal about the White House, how in its workings it might surprise readers they may not know?
Well, I think in the first book, we told quite a lot about how to get in and out of the White House and what are the tunnels below the White House and connecting to the Treasury building going elsewhere. That was all accurate. And I didn't recall any other book giving you quite that much information. I think
in this book, I think you get a little sense of how complicated it is to get a big bill through Congress. And one of the fun things about this is the grand bargain is that's part of the drama of the book, because we keep saying it's really interesting and exciting and necessary, but we don't reveal it until the very end. So it's another sort of, because it's supposed to, you're supposed to keep them reading. So we didn't want to give it away until late in the story.
Right.
But you can also see whether you agree with what President Trump's done or not on all these tariffs and immigration things, or whether you agree with my solution to the economic squeeze we're in and the demographic challenges we're facing. You do see it really does matter who the president is, what the president knows, how the president thinks, and how it's important that you spend the maximum amount of time focusing on that and being a good president. And that's not good for your opponents or the political media. What's good for them is a splashy news story every night, and hopefully 2 or 3 times during the day, where you have to stop doing what you're doing and think about that. So best thing you can do is to respond to those events whenever possible with a skilled press secretary and be judicious about what you say. Now, if you like doing it, which President Trump plainly does. He loves that. I mean, he thinks that's the most important part of the job. And he did get elected twice, so he can't be entirely wrong. But it really affects how people react, because nobody else gets press coverage like that. And so I used to try to really discipline myself not to talk about things that the press wanted to talk about if I thought it was just more dreck and it was going to keep me from doing the job I got hired to do. But you have to respond enough so that people think you're not afraid of the tough questions you're being asked. So it's one of the biggest challenges of doing the job.
Yeah, my daughter just graduated from law school a couple of weeks ago, and she said the last semester her con law, criminal law, and immigration professors told the classes, we really don't know what to tell you anymore about what the law actually is. They thought they knew the law. But so your point of one person can dramatically change, a country.
It's rare to change as much in a short period of time as it has, as the courts have changed under President Trump. A lot of these judges he appointed wouldn't go along with a lot of what he wanted to do, because when compared with what had been the law almost from the founding of the Republic, it was in conflict. You can't have Congress going around appropriating money and then the president says, no, you can't spend that. But a lot of people who support him think that's just hunky-dory. So, since the beginning of the Constitution, the Second Amendment, saying that the right to keep and bear arms should not be infringed, was always accompanied by its introductory phrase, which is a well-regulated militia being essential to an orderly society. The right to keep and bear arms will not be infringed, which is a way of saying, hey, we don't have a standing army here. And if we get attacked, we got to defend ourselves. And George Washington once signed a bill which required people to have a rifle and the gunpowder in the house, including in Quaker homes which were nonviolent, just so that was what passed for a military defense back then. And now it's all about how really great it was that crazy guy that killed 57 people in Las Vegas could get all the guns he wanted. If you make it a personal right, it becomes a totally different deal. And there was a great article over the weekend talking about how the states that had kept some restrictions on assault weapons, like 10 bullets per magazine or case, had substantially lower death rates than those that had no rate on them. And so I've had these arguments that I'm blue in the face, but I remember when President Obama got elected, I said, I grew up in that country. And I had a .410 shotgun when I was 10 years old. And I know what this is like. I could take this on because people couldn't listen to me and think I was going to come for their guns at night. They didn't think I was trying to end hunting or reasonable self-defense. But I said, they'll take you limb from limb. Be very careful. And I'll help you when you're ready to go with this. But it's different because it's all now just cultural stand-in.
So what was the most fun thing about working together for this book? Although I agree with everything you just said.
But it's always, I mean, the most satisfying thing is at the end of it, and you look at the book, and I have a thing. I've said this a few times lately, but it's been driving me for a couple of years now, and I think it's more important for 20-year-olds than it is for me, which is this notion of my time here is short. What can I do most beautifully? And one of the beautiful things I can do is work with this guy, which is a beautiful thing. And then to write a book where at the end of it you go like, okay, I like the way that turned out. I really like the way that. I have a book coming with Viola Davis next year, and it's done, and it's great. It's great. And that's it. You get done with it, and you go like, this is great. This thing really worked out well. It really did. And so that's fun for me.
I like it when we go to dinner together with our spouses. And I like it when Jim and Sue invite me to play golf with them. Factoid.
We'd invite you more if you had more holes than one.
James Patterson, his wife is a better golfer than he is. And was an All-American swimmer in college at the University of Wisconsin. But she only has 6 holes in one. He has 9. I don't know any pros with 9 holes in one. So they're both highly competitive. And since
The weird thing is we're not competitive. Isn't
What?
that weird? I don't think we're very competitive at all, Sue and I. We did like kicking your... However, we did like kicking his ass because we play with him and his almost pro cousin. And he said, well, let's play for $1. And I said, all right, fine. And we did kick your ass. That was fun. That was a competitive thing.
Yeah, I don't like to gamble, though, because I was raised in a Depression-era household, My state was, when I was born in 1946, it was right after the war and therefore after the Depression, but we still had the second lowest income in the country next to Mississippi. And everybody had Depression stories. And I remember the only time I ever seriously gambled was when I hit a jackpot in Las Vegas one night driving through. I just was driving through, so I went and played nickels and quarters, nothing more than that. I still have a hard time betting a lot of money. Even in a racetrack in my hometown has a racetrack, and I love horse racing. But I can't bear to put a lot of money on a horse race. I just keep thinking about what am I going to do? What if my grandchild needs something else in college, or
I don't think he actually paid the $2 either.
This is why I never took up golf or gambling. Now, they said that you would talk about this a little bit. You referenced it early on in the book, and it becomes important later. This legislation, the grand bargain, you call it early on in the book. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We spent a lot of money that we needed to spend after the 2008 crash, which was the biggest crash since the Depression, and then after COVID, which basically shut the country down for a year or so. And we had to spend the money, and believe it or not, if we had not spent it, we'd have gotten worse off because interest rates were below inflation. When interest rates are below inflation, it tells you got negative growth, and the government needs to, speed it up. And it gave us a chance to have an infrastructure bill, to pass a computer chips bill, so we can compete better with the Asian countries, and to pass a bill to give incentives to deal with climate change, which I think the administration is trying to do away with now, since they were only interested in helping Teslas before, and they've lost interest now. But when times are good, you should try to come as close to living within your means as you can. And if you don't, then interest rates will go up, and every year after that, unless you have another recession, you'll be spending more and more on interest, which leaves less and less for scientific research and other breakthrough areas which we need. So what we did with the grand bargain was to try to put America on a path to reducing all this. And by the way, all this is complicated by the fact that we now are below replacement level with our birth rate. Our birth rate's about 1.7 per thousand now, and replacement is 2.1. So what we did was to put out a plan that would show people like us in higher income levels, we should be paying more in taxes, but we should also show how to keep healthcare costs at a reasonable percent of your income, of national income, and how to manage all this debt in a way that kept interest rates down so we'd have something left over to invest in the future. All the stuff they've been cutting that you've been reading about in Doge, a lot of that's our future budget. I mean, our universities, the way they've been gone after, and you know, I went to Yale. I don't normally care what happens to Harvard, but I do. They do so much valuable research. Columbia, down the street in New York, does so much valuable research, and getting rid of all that, I think, have an enormous opportunity cost to America. Our universities, and by the way, we do have a lot of foreign students in our university, and unlike Americans, almost all of them pay the full freight of tuition and other costs. So it adds an enormous amount to our national income and reduces our deficits and our trade and investment deficit. So I think you have to, I've been concerned that we have people talking shorthand for the news, and then there's never enough time to ask the questions. For example, all these schools that have been accused of being anti-Semitic, if they celebrated the death of people because they were Jews, I think that's anti-Semitism. If they oppose Prime Minister Netanyahu's economic policy or immigration policy or Gaza policy, he's been there for 19 years. That's all these kids know. But there's a lot of disagreement within Israel about what the right thing to do is. So you have all these questions today that are unclear, and all of them affect the budget in some way. If you cut Columbia's budget because they had a lot of Palestinian students there and they thought Gaza was wrong, but what happened afterward was wrong too. Does it really make us stronger? Does it make us safer? Does it make us better? So there are a lot of questions out there that have to be.
You know, it's interesting. We had a session a couple of days ago, and somebody asked in the audience, what was the most important thing in terms of your success as president? And he said one word.
What? Arithmetic?
Arithmetic.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, how'd you balance a budget? I said arithmetic. Really, I mean, you know, you listen to all these arguments. Well, if I cut your tax bill from $1,000 to $500, you'll work so much harder and you'll spend that money and it will more than make up for the revenues that you cost. And it has maybe happened one time when John Kennedy was president and we had a temporary recession and he had a modest tax cut. The economy picked back up, and it is possible in that one case that we actually generated more revenues than the tax cut cost. But when President Reagan was in office, and we had a pretty good economy, he did well because we had never lived on tax cuts in peacetime before. We'd never had anything like it. So, but we still doubled the debt of the country. You know, we'd been a country a long time, by 1980. And after 200 years, we had a debt that was doubled in 8 years. And then when President Bush was in office, just by keeping the same laws, we went up another 50%. And then we took it down, and I had 3 surpluses in a row. And when I did it, but to give you an idea of what a deep-seated divisive issue it was way back then, most of the Republicans said that I had basically brought an end to American prosperity, that there would be a massive depression because of this. The end is nigh. And they didn't know what to do when it didn't happen. So they just said it was because something Reagan did on his 3rd day in office that made all that happen. I mean, it really was interesting. But you remember so I always tell people that you have to begin with arithmetic. There's just, you know, and we have to say that to a lot of our liberal friends. A lot of the people that criticize me now are people on the left who said, if I hadn't been so concerned about balancing the budget, we could have reduced the number of people without health insurance even more. And that is correct. We could have, if I could have gotten the money gone. But how long would it have lasted once interest rates started going up that we had to pay because the debt was going up? So I mean, you have to make these judgments, and one of the things I think, one of the most important things the president has to do is to be willing to disappoint his friends and to explain why. Because nothing would have made me happier than to get health insurance to more people. I lost to Congress trying to pass universal health insurance. So, but when you forget that there's still a lot of arithmetic and budgeting, you get in trouble.
Well, you know, the Times just ran a story about the deficit and the national debt, and I think you were listed as the last president who ever left office with a surplus. And so I think everybody should listen to what you have to say about that. I mean, words...
Can't cut taxes and lower the deficit. That's not happening.
Right, I know. Well, do you think in today's climate is a grand bargain possible?
I don't know. I don't know. I will say this is to encourage you a little bit.
Who was that?
There was a huge or a substantial article in the paper, in the New York Times, I think recently, about a study which showed that on many of the most contentious issues in the country, that 70% of them you could get a huge consensus on. That we agree on much more than we know if somebody just talks to us and we talk back and we get the facts where we agree on the facts, and then we talk about what the interests are on both sides, pro and con, and then we try to work out that it happens. The problem is that can't happen if we're screaming at each other. It can't happen if people try to make it impossible for us to agree on the facts. And so we think we're more polarized than we are, or than we would be, if we could just sit and visit with each other like neighbors. And it's an enormous benefit to the people who put the TV ads on or conduct the social media campaigns or run for office or advise politicians and get them to spend a fortune in ads. But George Bush and I run a presidential leadership program with 60 people every year. He picks 30, I pick 30. So his are most but not all Republicans, and mine are most but not all Democrats. And the only qualification is that every one of them has to manifest an interest in something besides their day job. Like we get a lot of veterans who spend a lot of time trying to create job opportunities for combat veterans that were really shaken in combat. And in more than 7, so they go to his library and mine and President George H.W. Bush's library and President Johnson's library, and they study presidential decision making. Then they take they break up into small groups and they take these contentious issues, and more than 70% of the time they reach total consensus. But they take time and they learn and they talk to each other and they, more important, they listen to each other. So I'm not pessimistic about our ability to work through this, but we got a lot of people working against us.
Yeah. I mean, look, in our lives, we go through this every day. We make compromises. We make compromises at work. We make compromises in our family life. We do it. But in Congress right now, they refuse to make compromises. Yeah. How can it work? Can't.
I remember. Do you remember last right before the presidential election got going? President Biden said that he wanted an immigration reform bill, and he offered to let the Republican majority in the Senate write the bill. And the chairman of the committee, Jim Lankford of Oklahoma, was quite a conservative Republican. And he said, I trust you. You write the bill on border security, and I'll sign it, as long as you give decent housing to these immigrants and avoid breaking children and families up and, do things. You do those things, I'll sign the bill to strengthen the border, and let's see where we can go. And President Trump made such a to-do of it, he said, you can't do that. He said, he was letting the Republicans write the bill. He said, it'll be your border security bill. Because he needed a problem worse than he needed a solution. And we're all being played like that all the time, one way or the other. And you got to ask yourself when you're judging people in public life, are they in the problem-solving business, or are they rubbing salt in your wounds? And I'm not being sanctimonious here. We've all done that. If you got a good issue and somebody just stubbornly won't let go of the wrong position, you just keep rubbing that salt. But it might help you win an election, but it's not good for the country. It's good for the country if we solve problems so we can go on to new issues. And that's what the framers meant when they said we're in the business of forming a more perfect union. We are not perfect. We're never going to be perfect, but we can always do better. That's what they meant by more perfect. And that's why I love having arguments and working with Jim, because he made me a lot better writer. He made me better at being able to turn into words what I was thinking and feeling. And that's important for all of you.
Any good questions there?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's see how good they are. Okay.
You will be stunned to learn that none of them are about the book. But before I go to these, so what's on your reading list? What's on your nightstand, both of you?
Well, I just finished the Dave Barry Class Clown, which I hadn't read him before, and he is hilarious and smart and interesting, and so that was nice. I'm not going to get into the Twain book, but I had high hopes, but, you know.
I got 3 or 4
Mike
books,
Connolly's new book I liked.
3 or 4 books about AI, and I'm about 150 or 60 pages into Ron Cherno's biography of Mark Twain. And for whatever it's worth, and I loved his book about Hamilton, I loved his book about George Washington, I really love this book about Ulysses Grant. And the New York Times let me write a book review about it, so it was weird. But anyway, it got a bad review in the Times, but I don't agree with it. I think it's really interesting.
Okay, let's get to these very lighthearted questions.
All right.
Given what we are seeing unfold in LA, how did we go from a country that welcomed the tired, hungry, and poor to the deep divisions we are seeing now?
That's a light one. What is it again? I didn't even quite hear it. What we're seeing in LA, what is the rest of it?
Yeah,
I'm not going to answer this, but
Given
I'm
what
just
we're
curious.
seeing in LA,
given what we are seeing unfold in LA right now,
Yeah.
how did we go from a country that welcomed the tired, hungry, and poor to the deep divisions we are seeing today? This is the lightest question, actually.
I don't know. Let me tell you, when I was a governor, the Ku Klux Klan moved their national headquarters to Arkansas. And they came down to our university town in Little Rock, and they marched around the campus trying to cause trouble. We had 2 other radical groups, one of whom brought about a large number of settlers into a remote mountain area that had cabins that each had a drop. And you could drop through the door and land in a foxhole. And they filled a school bus full of weapons. I can give you lots of examples like that. A good friend of mine was a sheriff who was murdered by Gordon Call, who was a big tax protester. You may remember him. The point is, it never occurred to me to ask for the federal government to do this, and I didn't need it. And President Trump inserted himself into it so he could badmouth California. And I didn't understand it. I mean, I understood it, but we didn't need it, as far as I could tell. So I think if you're gonna federalize the troops, it needs to be when there's a huge natural disaster or when the people charged with keeping order and following the law at the local level say we need help. Because you don't want to, I don't think you want to make a media event out of something like this. What you want to do is defuse it as quick as you can.
I lied. There are some light questions in here, so I'm going to intersperse right now.
He's just making one up now.
That's right.
He's looking at the card and making up a question, right. Yeah. What's the funniest thing that ever happened? Yeah.
I would never do that to you. Anyway, okay. Well, actually, I'm about to do this to you. I know you guys have homes fairly close to each other. Do you share time together as neighbors outside of writing books, fishing?
Let's go fishing tomorrow. What do you say?
We don't fish. I did when I was young, but
I did too as a kid. As a kid, I fished a lot. I haven't fished in a long time, and I don't really have any great desire to do it. Because, you know, the thing, we both grew up in the country, and the thing about fishing is you fish, you take the fish home, you eat them. I'm not going to fish and then throw a fish back. That doesn't appeal to me. But it did. As a kid, you get, you know, catfish and bass and whatever, and we take them home, and we knew how to, you know, and I did. I knew how to clean them and eat the suckers. Catfish are tricky because they get those things, they're nasty. But they're good eating, catfish.
So that's a yes on fishing, I guess. So
Huh? That was a mixed fishing message, yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to a simpler one. How can we fight for democracy and keep moving forward for the next generation?
Well, I can't hear the questions that well. I'm not answering them, but I'm just curious about what they are. I rate them on a scale of, you know.
How can we fight for democracy and keep moving forward for the next generation?
There's another book idea for us.
That's right.
Well, first you can't get discouraged.
Right.
There have always been enemies of democracy. There's always been, we make 2 steps forward and another step backward. This period today may be most like the period when the Union troops were withdrawn from the South after the Reconstruction period, or when Indian tribes were uprooted from damn near everywhere, or there are lots of periods that we're not all that proud of if we tell ourselves the truth. And one of the things that you ought to be fighting is this idea to purge all these books out of libraries. Jim, I like to give away books with my foundation, but he's given away more books than I ever will. And he even has helped to finance the salaries of employees in independent bookstores to keep them going, which I think is really worthwhile.
You know, just a little thought on giving stuff away, and you can all think about this because, you know, you're all rich people on the East Side. Sue and I got into this a few years ago, and we now have scholarships at 37, and we're not looking for applause here, but it's just something for you to think about in terms of when you're thinking about your charities. And we have 37 historically black universities and colleges where we support a bunch of scholarships. And the more we found out about those schools, they don't have money. You know, here's Harvard with $38 billion or whatever, and these schools don't have it. And weirdly, historically black universities and colleges are responsible for 60% of the black doctors, which is really, God bless them, but also all these other schools, which are talking about diversity and everything, they're only supplying 40% of the black doctors. What the hell is that all about? But anyway, but these schools do a heck of a job. The kids don't have money. A lot of them don't have money even to go there. They get accepted, but they can't go because they don't have any money in the family. So that's something when you're thinking about it, do a little bit of research, and that's a great thing to do. You know, it is for us anyway, and maybe it'll fit some of you as well. They're really needy, and it's something you can really feel good about.
Do you have a foundation on that?
I do, yeah. We have a Wish You Well Foundation. We fund literacy efforts across the United States and have for the last 25 years. And really, literacy is your fundamental skill. Without it, you can never reach your potential in life at all if you can't read at a high level. But lately, my wife and I have, I'm a native Virginian, and so we are trying to bring 3 institutions together in Virginia: the Library of Virginia, UVA Law School, and my college, VCU. Give all of the money that they will work together to try to spread the message of civics, compromise, consensus, democracy, and governance throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, to reteach that, because I'm not really sure it's being taught in schools anymore, that government used to function at a high level really well and created a lot of prosperity and a lot of good things for people, but the generations, you know, much younger than us don't see it that way anymore because government has never worked for them, really. And so I think it just needs to be re-education and amplification of this is what we can do if we work together. And compromise is not a dirty word. Two questions left. They're both pretty fun, so let's go for it. Ironically, this is for both of you, but you'll understand why I'm smiling.
It's just a college bowl.
So this is for President Clinton and Jim. What is more fun, being leader of the free world or being a successful thriller writer? So Jim, why don't you take the first one?
Well, you know, the thing of it is he's been president more times than I have, but I have more bestsellers. So I'm going with the writing thing. You know, and one of the things about life is somebody said, a long time ago I learned this lesson, that you're really lucky in life if you find something that you like to do. Yeah. And then it's a miracle if somebody will actually pay you to do it. And I think that's a nice thing for both of us, is that we found things that we really like to do, and we've been allowed to do it, and to do it at a pretty high level. And David, I'm sure the same thing. And I think it's really cool that you saw the light and said, I don't want to be a friggin' lawyer anymore. But, although you are a lawyer still, but you know, yeah. Yes. Can you give it up? Can you like be an ex-lawyer? I'm just curious.
Do I like being an ex-lawyer?
No, can you be an ex-lawyer? I'm just, you know, can you just sort of like, you know?
Well, I have to say my publishers really regret the fact that I actually read and understand the contracts. And I've negotiated them heavily in favor of writer. My litmus test for that is very simple. No one should make more off of a book than the person who created it. You know, I think that's fair.
But
Okay. Which is more fun for you? I'm sorry.
being president, because on the worst day, you could always find something you could do that put a smile on a kid's face or made a problem worse. All these politicians that belly-ached about the burdens of public office and all that, I'd have paid to serve. I loved it. And I think politics is by and large an honorable profession. But you have to decide how you're going to keep score. And if you don't remember anything else I said about this, you remember every one of you, without knowing it, maybe, you keep score on the things that matter to you in your life. So I made a decision before I started a career in politics. How are you going to know if you did a good job? That you won all these elections, or also lost two? That you got a big vote? I got a lot more electoral votes than the current occupant of the White House did. Twice. But you have to know, if you knew you had a day to live and you were living back on your career, how would you keep score about being president or anything else? And to me, the most rewarding things were, besides did you love doing it, are people better off when you quit when you started? Do children have a brighter future? And are we coming together instead of being torn apart? And is there a slightly better chance that we will continue this country's existence than that we will come to an end? I mean, if you can answer all those things, yes, then what excuse do you have for not being happy almost no matter what happens to you? And I just had, on the worst days, I'd have to keep saying, this is the way you keep score. So how are you going to turn that score around? And what can you do? And just keep going. You can't, but people shouldn't complain about all these tough times. We don't have a right to permanent, untroubled waters. All this stuff has always been a big battle. These identity politics things. Just suck it up and have a good time. If you're trying to...
All right. I changed my mind. I'd rather be president.
I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.